Why are exports, which cause monetary inflows, so important for the economy? Well, we started talking about them last chapter when we were already hinting that they were going to be important. Why does the book emphasize them so much? It turns out that when there's a monetary inflow, it increases the income in the region, not only by that amount, but by a multiple of it. For instance, if there's an export of $100, that may increase income by, for instance, $300. This concept is called a multiplier, and then it's pretty intuitive that you really want to export. You really want to increase income exporting because, again, income is going to increase by a multiple of that amount. Let's take a look at this. Consider a simple example. Assume you inherited $100 from an uncle that lives outside the region. So that's a monetary inflow. It comes from outside the region to the region. Now let's say that you spend 80% of this money, that is $80. What happens to the other 20%? You're not spending it. You're saving to buy a car later. That means that the marginal propensity to consume is 0.8. In the following slides, that will be called B. Formally, B is the proportion of the extra income that is spent, meaning not saved. Notice the emphasis on the words marginal and extra. B is the proportion of the extra income that you're going to spend. Marginal in economics means each extra, or one way to define marginal is each extra. I'm going to start imputing that data in the spreadsheet, which we're going to use as an example. Okay, so here we are. You inherited 100. You spent $80. Therefore, your B is going to be plus 80 divided by 100. Of course, I choose the number 100 because it's easy to calculate. Okay, let's continue with the example. However, of these $80, assume that only $35 is staying in the region. Why is that the case? What happened to the other $45? Well, you spend $80, but not necessarily in the region. You may have spent it on a restaurant outside the region. Let's say that the region you're talking about is a county. You may have traveled to another county and purchased dinner there. Now, this is called a direct import. But on the other hand, you may have spent it in the region, but the money ended up in the pocket of a non-resident, of somebody that does not live in the region. For instance, let's say you spend the money in the local restaurant, but the local restaurant is owned by a non-resident. So the resident, you take the money to his own region. That's called an indirect import. So of the $80 you spend, 45% you imported directly or indirectly, and 35% you spend in the region. So the marginal propensity to spend locally is 0.35. That is because 35% of the money you inherited stayed in the region. In the following slides, that will be called C. Now notice that C, the marginal propensity to consume locally, is B, which is your marginal propensity to consume, minus little I, which is your marginal propensity to import directly or indirectly. Now I'm going to input that in our spreadsheet. That will be our example as well. So here we are. Your marginal propensity to import was 45%. And then your marginal propensity to consume locally was there we are. Or if part of the expenses that we're consuming locally was 35, you can calculate this percentage as there you go. The percentage that you spend locally is C, your marginal propensity to consume locally. Okay, now the main point is the following. In a first round, the income increased by $100 because your income increased. So the overall income in the region increased. Why? Because your income increased. But in a second round, the income in the region increased again by $35 because $35 ended up in some local resident's pocket. You spend a big chunk of that $100, and 35% of it was spent locally. So it ended up in somebody's pocket, and this person was local. So the overall income in the region increased again by 35. For instance, assume you bought books from a locally owned bookstore and the money ended up in the owner's pocket as a profit. Two people had their incomes increased. You by $100 and the owner of the bookstore by $35. However, the owner of the bookstore will also spend part of the money locally. Assuming that the owner of the bookstore has the same propensities to spend as you have, he will have the marginal propensity to consume of 0.35. That means of the $35, $12.25 he's going to spend locally. Let's say that the owner of the bookstore bought candy from a local bakery and the $2.25 was used to pay the wages of the baker that works there. Thus, in the third round, income increased by $12.25. That's the baker's extra income. The process continues. Okay, let's go back to our spreadsheet. So here we are. So in the first round, the income increased by $100 because you inherited the money from an outside or from a no resident. In a second round, it increased by 35% of that, which is $35. That's because you spend the money locally and it ended up in somebody's pocket, some local person's pocket, such as the owner of the bookstore. Now that means that the owner of the bookstore has some extra income, but he or she will also spend 35% of it locally. So that's going to end up in somebody else's pocket, in the example, the owner of the candy store. So plus 35% times 35, that's 12.25. That money, it was the extra income of the owner of the bookstore that was spent locally, and it became income of the owner of the bakery. Now the owner of the bakery has some extra income, and he or she will also spend it, and part of it's going to be spent locally, assuming the same marginal propensity to spend locally. That would be 35% of 2.25, $4.2. Now you can see that the process continues over and over and over and over. There will be a round 5. Here I have until round 14. Because the amount is getting smaller and smaller, eventually you can stop calculating because the change is not significant or is not meaningful. And then you can calculate the total here. The total increment in income would be $153. So what started as $100 exports or $100 extra income became $153. What is the multiplier? The multiplier would be that scalar that times 100 equals 153. Here's a math trick. To calculate the multiplier, you can do plus 1 divided by 1 minus parenthesis b minus I. 1.53, that's the multiplier. Or directly you can calculate as 1 divided by 1 minus C, and there you go again. That means that for extra dollar after the multiplier, it will become $1.53. And that's how my extra $100 became $153. Each one of them got multiplied by 1.5. So total, since I have 100 extra, it was 153. You're gonna get back to the formula later in the slides. What if the monetary flow was permanent? Let's say, for instance, you come up with a new convention center, and annually there is an increment in local business by $100,000. So in the first year, the increment will be $100,000. In the second year, again, there will be another convention, so you also have $100,000. However, from the first round, from the first year, extra income was generated $35,000. $35,000 was the amount spent on local businesses. So, recap here. That generated an extra income of $100,000. That was the first round because of the new convention center. And then in the second round, generated $35,000, like we saw in the other example. However, in addition to that $35,000, the convention center has another conference. Therefore, we have another $100,000 in that year. So you add up those two here. In the third year, that $30,000 generate $12,000. These $100,000 generate $35,000, and then another conference, another $100,000. So now we have a total of $147 per year. See how those things multiply? So the difference from the previous example is that the previous example, that $100 only happened once. Here we have a conference center that has one convention per year. So every year there's a new cash inflow of 100. Now the multiplier is going to happen for each of these cash flows. So this generates this, and this. This one generates this, and this, and another one here that is not here. This, in the third year conference generate this, and so on. You can see the income, the total income is going to increase more and more towards the years. This is the income path. This is the first example. There's a mistake here in the figure. That should be $100,000, but then it goes down over time. On the other hand, if I have $100,000 every year, it keeps going up and up. So many public construction projects and other temporary infusions cannot be the source of a long-run equilibrium increase in incomes unless the project changes the money flows permanently. And that's the idea. That's how you're going to increase the level of income in the region. You can see that exports or monetary inflows really can increase income in a region, which is going to translate to employment and development. We're going to talk more about that in the slides.